Is Pope Leo planning a retreat on the Latin Mass restrictions instituted by his predecessor, the Prayerful Posse? We'll explore it all next. Welcome to an important Prayerful Posse. Be sure to go subscribe to the show. It's a wonderful way to support the work that we're doing, and it's totally free. Or you can visit RaymondArroyo.com if you'd like to contribute. Let's convene the Prayerful Posse. Canon lawyer, priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, and editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. I want to start with these reports this week that Pope Leo may be, and I want to underscore, may be rolling back Pope Francis's restrictions on the traditional Latin Mass. Now, the news comes as the Pillar and Catholic News Service have confirmed that the Pope's representative to Britain told bishops there that a recent meeting that he attended and briefed them on, that Pope Leo does not intend to repeal Traditionis Custodes, which restricted the traditional rite, but he is willing to grant generous exemptions to the enforcement of the law, at least in the UK. Father, CNS, the Catholic News Service, was quick to characterize this news as nothing has changed. Assuming the news is correct, are they right?
I would say CNS is not right, because if it's true that there'll be generous exemptions, that means when bishops request to have the traditional Latin Mass in parish churches, apparently now they will be given exemptions for a couple of years. In the recent past, bishops asking for that were generally denied under Pope Francis. And there were exceptions now being given under Pope Leo, so I hope that's continuing. But it is not a, how could we say, return to the order that Pope Benedict started, because when we say generous exemptions, that's only to bishops. What about lay people? Can they request this directly? There's no indication of that. What about parish priests? Could they request it? So it really is going back to, even before Pope Benedict, because under Pope John Paul II, it was up to the diocesan bishop to authorize the Latin Mass in his diocese. And now perhaps that's where we're headed.
Yeah. Bob, why not just abrogate Traditionis and restore Summorum Pontificum, Pope Benedict's legislation? I mean, surely if you're offering endless exemptions from this arbitrary law that Pope Francis came up with, that's where this seems to be tending anyway.
Yeah, there's a tension here. There's no question. And I think we're going to have to keep our eyes out for more of this, because it's clear that Leo wants to at least present himself as very much in line with his predecessor, Pope Francis, with whom he was very close. And so he's not going to just, at this, it's only a few months that he's been in the papacy, reverse what was a very controversial decision on the part of Pope Francis to limit the traditional Latin Mass, and it got a lot of pushback all around the world. And so it seems like this very language, these generous permissions that are being talked about, that can be even renewed after 2 years, that on the one hand, he doesn't want to formally abrogate Traditionis Custodes, but on the other hand, he wants to be kind of open to the people who have been protesting and give them the possibility of at least celebrating the Mass. I agree with Father, it would be much better, much simpler, much more coherent to just abrogate it, but he would have to kind of repudiate Francis, and I don't think that's what he wants to do.
Yeah, well, and as Father alluded to earlier, Cleveland and San Angelo in the United States, they both got exemptions this year, which does demonstrate this kind of a thawing under Pope Leo, at least a willingness to hear the bishops out and grant exemptions on a case-by-case basis to bishops. Another indication that Leo might be willing to loosen these restrictions placed by Pope Francis on the Latin Rite. He received the apostolic administrator of a Brazilian group called the Personal Apostolic Administration of St. John Mary Vianney. Now, that organization was established in 2002 under John Paul II. It has one sole purpose, and that is a dedication to the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. Father, how significant is that meeting, given the news we're hearing out of the UK?
No, it's significant because Bishop Raffan, who is the bishop of that canonical established prelature, so to speak, administration, he is 75 years old, so he will need to be replaced. So the question is, will that administration continue to be in existence and given a new bishop, or will it be collapsed into the diocese? Because there's an interesting history there. The Bishop of Campos had been Bishop Castro Meyer, who ordained many priests who wanted to celebrate the Old Mass. And then there were lots of those priests present in that diocese, and John Paul II regularized it. So there are a lot of people in that diocese and that administration who want to continue to go to the Latin Mass. I'm sure the Holy See is going to make an arrangement. Whether they'll continue to have their own separate bishops, another question. We'll see what the discussions lead to.
Yeah. Bob, I want to move back now to one of your favorite topics. I know something very dear to your heart. The interim reports of the Synod on Synodality were released this week. These study groups, now these were reports initially set to be released back in June, but the date was extended because of the passing of Francis, the election of the new Pope. According to a report in the National Catholic Register, one of the groups attached to the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith says their final report will, quote, reserve a special word for the possibility of a women's diaconate. The group is also looking at accounts of women in church leadership, the nature and exercise of ecclesial power, and what's described as critical tensions regarding clericalism and male chauvinism. Bob, it feels like they're leading the witnesses here. I mean, you know, if I kept saying, well, Bob, give me examples of male chauvinism that you've seen. I mean, no matter how many times they're reminded that this is a closed case on female ordination, this issue continues to be pushed and studied and examined. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, actually, these reports are out early. They were displaced in December, and now they're already out in early November. And we're hearing other reports that they're refusing to use the term controversial issues, and instead they're calling them emerging issues,
yes,
you know, and such like. So, I mean, there's a lot of language that's trying to shuffle the cards here. Look, I mean, we've talked about this many times. The question of deaconesses is a theological question. It's always been connected with deacons, priests, bishops, you know, the order of the hierarchy in the church. And so there are certain activist elements in the church that want to keep issues like this alive, like they want to keep the LGBT conversation going with, obviously, you know, a goal, not immediately they know, but at some point it'll flip the traditional teaching. I don't see that this is going to go anywhere. And I have a feeling that it's not likely to go anywhere with Leo. Francis talked about making room for women in the church. Leo has done the same thing. We may get what is some sort of office that will be essentially deaconesses, but it would really surprise me if Leo was to allow this significant change in how we understand orders in the church. It may happen, but I think the only way we're going to know is to see what he decides.
Well, Bob mentioned this idea. You see the changing language, Father. They said that female ordination and homosexuality particularly were controversial issues. That was the one that they now said it's an emerging issue. It's not controversial anymore. My question is to you, has synodality come to mean we won't take no for an answer when it comes to settled issues like essential human morality and female ordination?
Well, I think so. Synodality means whatever the people in charge tell us it means. In fact, that's the big question here. After all these years of synodality, none of us can specifically define it. We now have a new word in one of the reports, pastorality. Comes out, which is, what does that mean? It's sort of be shorthand for pastoral solutions, meaning solutions that contradict doctrine but are good for the people, which of course anything that contradicts doctrine is not good for the people. Now I should note, these are called interim reports, and they refer that the final reports are coming out in December.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a straight, why were these issued in November? And I read them all the other day carefully.
Yeah.
A lot of them seem to have been written in the period of July and August of this year, because some of them refer to what the committees will do in September. So I have a why is this? Why do we need interim reports 6 weeks before the deadline for the final reports? And they're kind of anodyne. They don't say much, and they're also, sad to say, they reflect kind of the jargon, of the faculty lounge at major universities where you talk about intersectionality and lateral XYZ. This is more, I hate to say it, but this is the bureaucracy talking to itself and letting us in on it to make us feel that we're participants when they're all doing it all on their own.
Well, or another word for that might be pastorality. I mean, we keep making words up, so it doesn't matter. Other groups submitted reports on, quote, priestly formation. The selection of bishops were a big deal in these reports. The pastoral problem of polygamy in Africa and the liturgy. Most of these reports examined and called for what's called here greater participation of the people of God, particularly women and families. And they're connecting that to the process of priestly formation and choosing bishops. So the laity and women would have greater control, I guess, over choosing bishops. The report on liturgy raised questions about how the church might promote greater recognition of women within liturgical life, suggesting that women are suffering discrimination, Bob. What do you make of these patterns that we're seeing across all of these reports? Certainly, women's role in the church seems to be a fixation of every one of these reports.
Yeah, and I think that's something of a battering ram, too. It takes what is a kind of a sensitive point in secular political circles. And if you look at the general tenor of where this is all going, it clearly is an attempt to change institutions and the way decisions are made. They keep denying this. They keep talking about how this is really just, are all going to be talking with one another. Everybody gets a voice. But at the end of the day, with this cash is out, and occasionally even the mask slips a little bit, and they talk about changing structures, changing institutions, changing decision processes. So, look, it can start with this, and then if this conversation can overthrow, as I was saying earlier, this kind of traditional understanding of what ordination means in the church, it's the first step towards something that is much more radical and may extend to all different parts of the church.
Well, this is a good segue to a piece of video I want to share with you, Father. The Secretary General of the Synod released a video on their social media, and this is a fellow named Matt Kraish. He's from Chicago. He's a member of the Bishop's Young Adult Multicultural Advisory Committee, and he's the synodal coordinator for the Diocese of Gary. Watch.
For synodality to really take roots, we must realize it's not just an organizational exercise, but that it is really a movement of the heart. So we are working to develop resources and ways for people to enter into the spirituality of synodality so that can begin with the interior conversion of the heart and spread to our larger structures and our organization as church.
Father, I always recoil when anybody starts talking about remaking structures as church. The church is the body of Christ. But what is the spirituality of synodality? Any ideas?
I have no idea, except that I think it's a mask for revolutionary activity. And in one of the documents, in this interim report, it refers to overcoming or to the nature of resistance. Now, as soon as you say someone with whom you're in dialogue is resisting you, then you're basically saying you're not taking orders. You have to do that. When you say we have to have conversion of heart, what they're basically implying is some people don't love this stuff and they should start loving it. And when they do, then we can all go on and change the structures. And by the way, we as Catholics do not refer to the church as a structure. And we don't refer to the hierarchy as a structure. The doctrinal heritage is not a structure. You want to talk about what the church is? It's the mystical body of Christ. And Jesus himself rules the church through the hierarchy. The church is not ruled by the people electing Jesus to be in charge. And the implication seems to be that we're at fault if not everyone has a say in how the church is governed. That's why I think it's a manipulative tone, by the way, to tell people your heart isn't ready to accept what we're talking about.
They're right.
Leave that to me to decide. Convince my brain, as best you can, that your arguments hold water. And that really is what I think we need to do. So that man seems to be a very nice man. I applaud the work he's doing for the church. But this is not what synodality should be. Synodality, by the way, is a meeting of bishops in order to advise the Pope. That's what synodality is according to the Second Vatican Council, not according to this.
We've expanded this, Bob. We've expanded this thing into, I mean, it's basically silly putty now. Now we have a spirituality of synodality. With all due respect, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, this language about the heart, I mean, Father is quite right that they're more or less telling you you're hard-hearted, you're rigid, you're not willing to accept the Church of what's happening now. And this language about the heart is actually a traditional language. You see it in St. Augustine.
Right.
Unquiet is our heart until it rests in thee. So the heart is actually directed toward Christ. It's not directed toward synodality. Or in Cardinal Newman, our recent doctor of the Church, talks about cor ad cor loquitur, heart speaks to heart. But what they mean by that is something quite different than this. I mean, we're in this kind of conversation, and this guy does seem to be a decent human being.
No, he's a nice man.
Yeah, he means well.
I don't fault him.
But the heart here seems to be involved in a kind of a political formation, almost like a struggle. I don't want to say quite struggle session in the communist sense, but there's a sense that somehow synodality ought to be moving you in a certain direction. It's as if no one ever talked to anyone else before synodality was put out, formally as what the form of the church should be today and forever.
Yeah.
And so, it's unfortunate, but we can use language of the heart, but the language of the heart, as in the tradition in Augustine and Newman, has to be the heart that's being converted. We never hear in these documents about what is the purpose of Christianity. Why did God become man? To overcome our fall, the sin that is in us, and redeem us. Where is that in any of these documents? That I actually put a word search. I searched for this term sin in these documents, and it comes up in combinations of words that have sin in them, like sincere or something.
Oh.
The word sin as such never appears. Redeem never appears. Salvation never appears.
Wow.
So whatever this heart is, it isn't much pushing what the very purpose of Christianity and God's incarnation in the world was all about.
Well, and spirituality points to an object, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Marian spirituality, a Eucharistic spirituality, a synodal spirituality. So listening and talking is now its own spirituality. There's something very odd that's being created before our eyes. And I think we've been talking about this for years, but as it tries to concretize itself, it's getting more and more, I guess, absurd as it gets, closer to hardening. According to EWTN's Hannah Brockhaus, one of these synodal study groups, no doubt acting as church, attempted to survey lay people on how to enhance their participation in the selection of Catholic bishops. Quote, in total, 15 out of 33 laypersons responded. These groups will continue to meet and deliberate into 2026. Is anyone paying attention, Father? And is this the role of the laity, to participate in the selection of Catholic bishops?
Well, in the historical evolution of the church, the selection of bishops did involve at certain periods popular acclamation. But that was at the very beginning of the church and before the hierarchical structures were, established and all the rest. Over time, kings and potentates took over the naming of bishops. And that caused the investiture controversy, a big problem in the Middle Ages. At the Council of Trent, reforms were put in, and the Holy See began a much more vigorous prosecution, let's say, of the case that the Roman pontiff should name bishops in the Latin Church and approve them in the Eastern Catholic churches. So why would lay people be involved in the selection of bishops? As a canon law, I can say they're involved in as much as they're consulted. And I think it is a good idea about if you have a candidate for bishop, that the Holy See send confidential surveys to lay people in addition to priests in order to gauge the character and knowledge and experience of a man.
Yeah.
But the idea that you would allow groups of lay people to publicly get involved in their diocese to naming bishops, that will be chaotic. But that's in there, and this is a problem because, by the way, many bishops are not from the diocese that they get named to, because the Holy See, in its wisdom and experience, has determined that in many cases it's better to bring a priest or a bishop from elsewhere into the diocese. So this, if I can just make a sidebar,
Yeah.
I've said it all along. The goal of synodality is lay governance in the church.
Yep.
And lay governance in the church contradicts the hierarchical nature of the church. The church is not an association of like-minded people who decide that we want to set up a structure with pope, bishops, and priests, but that it's us doing the work. It's the other way around. God established the church. He named the shepherds. He named the chief shepherd. The apostles ordained their successors and priests. And the power of governance is an aspect of pastoral care. It's not essentially about who gets to make decisions. It's about God, through the Holy Spirit, guiding the chosen and ordained men who serve the church.
Yeah.
And the fact that women can't participate in it, don't blame the church, blame God. Because Jesus never picked a woman to be a bishop, priest, or deacon. That's it. That's nothing against women. Women run the world, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right?
Well, and
If
in
you
many
don't like
cases,
that, you
they
got
run
a
the
problem. They
parishes
do.
too, Father.
They
I
run
mean,
the
let's
parish.
face it.
I deal with more women volunteers in my 40 years of the priesthood than any of the people would believe. Getting a man to help a parish priest, that's like selling ice to Eskimos. It's not that easy.
Well, you know what? But it needs to happen. If
agree.
men should be more involved in parish life, and I hope in time they will. Otherwise, this whole thing's going to turn into like some kind of pseudo parliament, called the synodal way. And I guess the priest becomes an employee of the synodal council meeting in, the Sanhedrin meeting in the parish hall. But there's a related story here, and it's typical of all things synodal. InfoVaticano.com reports this week, and we've seen this in person, guys. We saw this during the conclave. St. Peter's Basilica has recently set up what it calls listening spaces inside the basilica. Here's a photo. A Monsignor in charge of the maintenance of St. Peter's says the listening spaces are available to worshipers and visitors. They provide, quote, a place for dialogue and spiritual accompaniment, offering everyone the opportunity to, quote, pause and be listened to, whether by priests, nuns, or lay people trained in pastoral service. Bob, weren't these things once called confessionals?
Well, I've been to confession several times in St. Peter's, and it's a great experience. It's actually very crowded, too. It's very hard to get into those confession booths at times, especially during years like this when you have the Jubilee going on. Well, I mean, it's not entirely wrong what they're saying that they're trying to do. But if you look at those so-called, reception booths, and a priest I know said to me, they kind of look like a men's toilet in an airport. They're white and they've got this funny kind of configuration. It doesn't seem to fit at all in St. Peter's, in that beautiful Baroque splendor of St. Peter's. I mean, if you wanted to have this, there could probably be another way to do it. And they're kind of sitting out, it seems, in the middle of nowhere. And
they're in the middle of an aisle.
I don't know if this is very inviting. I'm in general in favor of these days of trying to get people to talk with people in the church, and that impulse is not necessarily a bad thing. But the way this is being carried out, it kind of strikes me as we've kind of lost the sense of Catholicity, the depth of what Catholicity is, the beauty of it, the richness of how you approach people. It's at the same kind of superficial level that everything else in society is taking place in, and you actually convey a lot to people by the way things look and the way you approach them, as much as what you actually say to them. So, I applaud the effort, but I don't applaud the actual execution of what is going on.
Father, if they're not synodal confessionals, can't people be listened to at other institutions that predate synodal speak, like a coffee shop or on the street?
Yeah, well, I agree with Bob. The impulse, I think, is good to listen to people. But why don't you simply deploy priests, nuns, or brothers who are visibly, identifiably missionaries of the church at the entrance of St. Peter's or in the back and say, would you like to talk about what this is? Would you like to talk about Christ and the church? But the danger here will be, of course, that this will become like the complaint department or the free counseling department. And then what about the language issue? I mean, who's going to be able to do all that? And you're right. Bob's point is profound. How things look can communicate what you're doing. Yep. And those basically, they ape kind of like semi-private confessional, but but with a 21st century look, I thought we were in this Basilica St. Peter's.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have done something a little better, but no, let's see where it goes. But I think other means could be better.
Well, yeah, I just don't know why you have a listening station in the middle of an aisle with tourists packing in to see the Pietà. I mean, well, it's literally steps away from that. It's right near the Blessed Sacrament Chapel there at St. Peter's. So it's an odd placement, but it's a weird thing to have. Like you can't listen outside of this box. I don't understand that. But anyway.
Raymond, just another small point. If you look at the pictures of that, on the outside, the sign says welcome in Italian and in English.
Yeah.
So already it's like we've kind of reduced things down to these two languages, which we know are actually quite important. And we probably want to talk at some point among ourselves about the use of English that the Pope is not practicing, even when he's talking to movie stars from California and others who don't really speak Italian and say, hey, that was wonderful, but I didn't understand a word he said.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we should touch on that, and this is about the Pope speaking out, so maybe we can circle back to that. Pope Leo this week, once again, exiting Castel Gandolfo in what's becoming the papal plane ride to Pope Francis. Pope Leo uses this exit from Castel Gandolfo each week to address the press gaggle. He did so this week about the situation of Christians in Nigeria. Given the attention paid to it by President Trump and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, the Pope said this.
I think in Nigeria, in certain areas, there is certainly a danger for Christians, but for all people, Christians and Muslims have been slaughtered. There's a question of terrorism. There's a question of that has to do a lot with economics, if you will, and control of the lands that they have. Unfortunately, many Christians have died. And I think it's very important to seek a way, the government with all peoples, to promote authentic religious freedom.
Bob, you've followed this story for a long time. Your reaction to Leo's comments here, and does the genocide we're seeing in Nigeria, does it have a lot to do with economics and control of the land?
I don't believe so. I've said this before, but everything he said is true. It's true that some Muslims, some so-called moderate Muslims, are being slaughtered by the radical groups like Boko Haram and the Islamic State in Western Africa province, and others. And there's that problem. There's also a problem of a land clash between cattle raisers who tend to be Muslim and farmers who tend to be Christian. But all this is really a side issue. If it's true that Muslims are killed in Nigeria, and it's true, the proportion is probably 6 times as great for Christians. And the Christian element is really pursued. I mean, churches are burned, schools are ransacked, children are kidnapped. These are all things that I think the church has to point to specifically. Now, Leo's trying to spread some oil on the waters and calm things down, and we understand that that's what he's about. But we've been losing, really, not only a defense of our own people, but it's a bold statement of the truth of what's going on there, that there is a tremendous slaughter of Christians going on. Probably in this year alone, 10,000 Christians will be killed in Nigeria, more than in all the rest of the world combined. And the statistics are hard to find, but I think that's the most legitimate kind of the range finding of where it's about. And we really ought to say that. I think we need church leaders, not only people like me and you, Raymond, and others, but church leaders need to say, hey, wait a minute, our people are being slaughtered there. And they can't spread out the blame with all these other things. They even invoke climate change, as if climate change is a major factor in Christians being martyred. It's preposterous.
No, and Father, the Pope did mention terrorism, but again, this is like George Bush mentioning terrorism. There are people who are agents of the terrorism, and unless you're willing to identify them, you can't fight an idea. You have to fight against an aggressor.
No, it's very true, and it's interesting because the Pope, at the end of it, brings up the topic of religious liberty. But in the first part of his statement, he says this isn't really about religion because both sides are being killed. By implication, he means the Christians being killed by Muslims, Muslims by Christians. Well, Christians are not killing the Muslims. As Bob says, it's moderate Muslims because Boko Haram, their first enemy is moderate Islamic people, and Christians fall into that category. And then, secondly, if I can go back to just even the premise, I think Pope Leo is diving into some very troubled waters here by giving these weekly or bi-weekly press conferences. Because the media, they will cover the Catholic Church when it's in their interest. And what is in their interest? Fresh news of a controversial nature.
Yep.
And if Pope Leo keeps meeting on this regular basis, and let me say this, I'll praise him for taking a day off. The reason he's in Castel Gandolfo is they've got a tennis court there and a swimming pool.
Yeah.
And I'm a priest, and I know priests are under a lot of pressure. The Pope is under enormous pressure. He needs a day off.
Yeah.
But make it a complete day off. Don't talk to the media.
Yeah.
And when you want to make a press conference, well, then do it on your own terms. Don't do it at night with cameras and lights, and you're standing there and you can't hear the report and you got to jump from languages. Do it yourself in the Apostolic Palace, have the questions given, and know what the answers are going to be ahead of time because you're able to study them. The great trap here is someone says something, the Pope says something that he didn't expect, or gives an answer that wasn't expected, and boom, you got a major world controversy. We don't need that. That's not what I think the Pope should do.
Yeah, and Bob, as Father alludes to there, I mean, the Pope's comments are being used with a political end in the United States and globally. I mean, he was asked his thoughts in the same presser, in the same press gaggle on his way out of Castel Gandolfo. He's asked about the immigration controversy in the United States. Now, the right answer is, the U.S. bishops are taking care of that. God bless you all. That's the right answer. But in light of the U.S. bishop's statement on the U.S. immigration enforcement at their fall meeting last week, which we covered, here's what the Pope said.
I appreciate very much what the bishops have said. I think it's a very important statement. I would invite, especially all Catholics, but people of goodwill, to listen carefully to what they said. I think we have to look for ways of treating people humanely, treating people with the dignity that they have. If people are in the United States illegally, there are ways to treat that. There are courts. There's a system of justice. I think there are a lot of problems in the system. No one has said that the United States should have open borders. I think every country has a right to determine who and how and when people enter. But when people are living good lives, and many of them for 10, 15, 20 years, to treat them in a way that is extremely disrespectful.
Bob, he seems to be echoing the royal doctrine on this that you've been articulating here for several weeks. If they've been here for, 10 or 20 years, we should do something, as opposed to people who just came into the country. But why is he getting into immigration policy at all?
Yeah, well, climate and immigration, we know that those are the two things that every recent pope or at least the past two popes have considered to be really high-profile things that they need to address. And look, I want to defend myself here because Ronald Reagan said the same thing back in the 1980s, that people who've been, I put it this way, that people who have been allowed into the country and have lived here for years, our country has a certain moral responsibility toward them because now they have families, they have friends, jobs, they're kind of integrated into the society. It's a problem. And I've been telling the bishops this for years. They've invited me a couple times to speak to them about this. And, at that point, since we now do have a moral responsibility, I think that the more recent people who were just let in hordes by the Biden administration, and particularly the criminals, I mean, that's an entirely different class of people. I think we have to figure out in our political debates what to do about them. The criminals should absolutely go. And look, it's easy, we've said this before, it's easy to put together video clips that show our enforcement being pretty rough. Tom Homan is a pretty rough character, but you've got to be a rough character to deal with these criminals who are just monsters. I mean, they're human trafficking, they're drug trafficking, they're murderers, etc. That's not just a hype by Trump, that's the reality on the ground. And so I don't think that, I think our bishops tried to be balanced. They talked in the same terms about the country has a right to control its borders, but how about controlling who is in the country illegally at the same time? I'm all for being compassionate and trying to work these things out, but look, our court system is already overwhelmed with the number of illegals that there are in the country. So what Leo said is true in an ideal world, but in the United States right now, because of failures on the part of our own government, We don't have that luxury. We really have to deal with the situation in a way that is a little bit unusual. But what else are you going to do when you have 10 million illegals suddenly coming into a country? And it's unprecedented, the situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
So, look, he's wading into something that's very complicated, as our bishops have. They mean well, but I'm not sure they've taken the full measure of the problem.
Yeah, well, Father, I mean, that's the real, when you say we need to treat immigrants humanely, putting them in servitude to a cartel that brought them here, that they paid through the nose to get to our shores, there's nothing humane about that. And allowing lawlessness and people to just overstay visas and take resources from the people that have paid into the system, or our American poor that need these resources, that's not humane. That's not treating people humanely. I mean, the Pope did mention every country has a right to determine who and how and when people enter. So the question is, why are they so focused then on aliens coming into the United States and aiding them in flouting the U.S. law?
Well, I'm not sure, all of the motivations, but I can say that, yeah, we want humane treatment. But the answer is arresting someone who has illegally entered the country, overstayed their visa, is that an inhumane action? And I'd say it's not. Now, as regards humane actions, the federal government has voluntary repatriation, which they'll pay for your flight back to your country, and they will not prohibit you from reapplying for illegal entrance. For me, that's extremely humane. The United States could have basically said, nobody gets out of here on our dime. We're going to arrest you, and then we'll ship you out in our cargo plane kind of arrangements, which we saw when all those criminals were sent down to El Salvador.
Right.
No, we're saying, we'll put you on a flight. You can go to your house. Now, I agree with Bob that it considering the case is only a mere 15, 20 years, should be different than someone who was arrived here as part of a drug cartel or something like that. But those are specifics that require the people who run the country to be lobbied and vote for and all the rest. And to just simply say, well, since they've been here 20 years, please don't arrest them. No, that's how you control the situation. And, I remember the Reagan thing that Bob spoke about. And what were people doing? They were trying to prove they were here that long. But what it did was it propelled a whole nother generation of people to cross the border because they were incentivized by the idea that they could be illegally present in the country and not be evicted.
Right.
So these are the kind of complications that happen. And then, with all due respect to the Holy Father and the Holy See, the Vatican City State does not have a refugee program. They do not have an illegal alien problem because it's illegal to remain in the country. You have to be sympathetic and say, if it doesn't work in Vatican City, it's not going to work in other places.
Yeah. And there are fines and jail time attached to crossing the Vatican City's borders and doing so illegally. So, I mean, it's very odd. This whole scene is very odd, and how it's become the overarching teaching, if you will, eating up all of this public space by the Holy Father and the bishops. They want this to be, for whatever reason, the centerpiece of Catholic thought and articulation. And I just think people are hurting and yearning for something far deeper, far more profound, and something that touches their lives, mainly Jesus Christ and his salvific message. I wasn't going to do this story at all, but I have to do it because it was covered so widely in the media this week. Pope Leo hosted a luncheon for the Jubilee of the Poor on November 16th. And in attendance were 48 transgender women. That's what the Washington Post described these people as. Now, this carries on a tradition established by Pope Francis years ago. The controversy, according to the Washington Post, is that none of these 48 people were seated at the main table with the Pope as they had been in years past. Father, your thoughts on this story and the outreach to the trans community?
Well, this is a complicated story because it goes back to Pope Francis, and there is a nun who works with basically male transvestites who are often in prostitution. And she's trying to help them, but their help does not extend to them renouncing this myth that you can turn yourself into a woman by dressing up and changing your hair and makeup. Now, apparently this group was invited by a parish priest who does similar work. And I understand that the Holy See gave out tickets to parishes and groups, and that it was up to them to who they were going to invite. So it wasn't so much that the Holy See was giving a direct invitation, but it was all in the media that they were coming, and the Holy See basically said, all right, bring them here. That's a lack of charity. They do not, these people who are involved in, sexual immorality, illegal behavior with prostitution, and then just destructive self-misidentification to say, if I dress like a woman, you have to treat me like a woman. I want to treat you the way God made you, which is you're a son of God. And the sons of God don't act in this way. The Holy See needs to do more of that. So, yeah, again, just the overall thing, and you were referring to it, people go look to the Vatican to find the kind of stuff that Mother Angelica and other broadcasters of the Catholic faith have been giving for the last 50 years, which is, how do I get to heaven and how do I have a good life on the way? That's what we need to be talking about, not how do we satisfy the agenda of the United Nations, the European Union, the sexual revolution, the trans revolution, all of this stuff. People are fed up with this. Why is it that Catholic parents have to deal with local school boards when men go into girls' locker rooms? Well, it happens because authority figures in the world say this is good, and when the church doesn't contradict them, they smile and they say, look, even your Pope has transvestites coming here. They don't call them transvestites, they call them transgender. So if the Pope can have lunch with a transgender, why can't your daughter have a transgender in her locker room? That's how these people argue.
Bob, any reaction to this story? I mean, boy, it got a lot of coverage.
First of all, I want to say a hearty amen to what Father just said. I mean, it leaves you almost speechless, doesn't it? I read some reports that some of these trans women were activists. And this, to me, always seems to be a problem because Pope Francis, I think, when he would meet with trans people, thought it was like Jesus meeting with tax collectors and prostitutes, that these are people who are outcast, and so he's trying to draw them in. And I mean, we could have hoped that he was evangelizing them, but who knows where that actually went. But just the media reaction to this is quite interesting. The fact that these trans people, whatever we want to call them, were not seated at the head table with the Pope, was regarded by them as some kind of outrage. And it was reported as such in the media that, they get the impression that they have a right to be at the table. And that to me is the bigger problem than the just the fact of their being there, because the activists are not simply people who are being evangelized. They come with an agenda. And so the fact that they are in the room and then maybe they're sitting at the head table with the Pope, they kind of regard this as a validation, as Father rightly says. And so that spreads out into society. The media love to run with stories like this. This creates a moral confusion in an attempt to do something that's generous and, reaching out to the marginal creates a moral confusion that really it kind of echoes throughout the entire church. So I think if Leo wants to bring clarity and decorum back to the church, which he clearly talks about, one of the things he has to do is to get events like this, get a grip on events like this. And it's not going to be easy because there seems to be an attempt to point fingers that it's other people who are responsible for this, and I guess it's true in this instance. But you need to get a grip on this. I mean, you need to kind of send the message to the people who are putting those tickets out and the people who are distributing them to say, yeah, okay, there's a limit, though, on who we're going to allow into the room.
Well, I mean, look, we talked about this earlier. My concern is you're in the business of saving souls, and you're allowing your public capital, if you will, to be gobbled up by people hijacking your agenda like this story, which is a non-story as far as I'm concerned. When I first read it, I'm like, who cares? But you have activists who have friends in newsrooms who are willing to cover this stuff, so it gets blown up into a different meaning. So the Pope had a dinner with poor people, and it turns into a diss for a group that felt they should be at the head table. But I think somehow the narrative is being lost by the church and the Pope in this Jubilee year, and everybody else is using them to promote climate change and immigration enforcement and sexual agendas. Last weekend, Pope Leo met with members of the film industry. There's Spike Lee and Kate Blanchett and others, and he told them, your job as storytellers is to rediscover a portion of the hope that is essential for humanity to live to the fullest. Father, the Pope called these artists to tell stories of redemption. But what was your reaction to his overall message?
No, I read the message, and I have to say the message was full of praise for an industry that promotes immorality on a regular basis. And there was no rebuke for the disedification and the scandal that so often accompanies Hollywood movies. There was, I have to say, there was a sense that the Pope was like starstruck by having these people there. The talk was not fatherly and serious enough, in my opinion, because it went on with kind of speculations about the nature of the film industry and what it does. And, undoubtedly this was written by someone else, but, the Pope's reading, it becomes his. Look, I love movies. We've had over the years discussions about movies and music and all. I mean, Broadway is wonderful. I'm not against entertainment. But growing up in the 60s and 70s as a kid, I said to myself, no, wait a minute, where is the movie industry going? And the movie industry, the trajectory has been horrible. That's when X-rated and R-rated movies came into business. We know now that pornography is the biggest media reality on a dollar term in the United States and in the world. And we have enormous resources being, poured into stuff that's drawing souls to hell. There was no reference to any of that in the Pope's talk. So I think it could have been done nicely, a rebuke, and say, talking about the integrity of the human person also means we respect the nature of male, female, and the intimacy of marriage. These have to be respected in entertainment. Otherwise, it's exploitative. And by the way, how much of Hollywood is now exploitative of different groups?
Well, Bob, it's interesting that the Pope gave a list of his favorite movies. None of them are before 40 years ago. I mean, they're all ancient movies. I mean, they're 2 generations removed. And the other interesting thing is when you compare that address to John Paul II's letter to artists, which I remember he giving me a copy of. And when you read that, he's calling you to be the next Michelangelo and Caravaggio and to draw you to the truths and the majesty and the mystery of God and his plan. That's not what this message was at all. This was basically about let's keep theaters open and no AI in movies.
Yeah, I have to say I'm not a movie fan, so everything that I'm saying I'm going to say is prejudiced by starting from that premise. But yeah, I mean, look, he talked about very safe movies that he liked. It's a Wonderful Life, and
Life is beautiful.
Life is beautiful, and look, that's great. I mean, it's kind of anodyne, but it's fine. It's entertaining. You can watch it for a while. But, I mean, what we've had in movies since then, of course, has been very, very different. My wife and I, when we go to the films, we instantly notice there always has to be a homosexual or a lesbian character or a relationship or something. That is just a matter of course. It seems to be de rigueur for the industry these days. Now, you do invite people into your house, and to kind of rebuke them in a harsh way would be probably wrong. But he could have really done more. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't very good. It just didn't give you an aspiration to anything higher, as you rightly say, Raymond. And the difference is, I think that Pope John Paul II was an actor. And he was a poet. He was a very good poet at times in his work. I've actually written a couple of essays about him. So he understood the potential that exists in art in a way that I think very few others. I think Benedict had an inkling of this as well, because he loved music so much. But they were different persons. I don't think that Leo, at least as far as we can judge so far, is kind of in that category. So it's not surprising that either his ghostwriter or he himself did not aspire to more. But you're right. I mean, look, the great art that the church has produced over centuries, and some of the participants talked about this, about the richness of the Catholic cultural tradition, in addition to its spiritual, theological, moral tradition, is really quite remarkable. And that's what I think they were moved by, just being there, whatever the Pope said, because he spoke Italian and they didn't understand what he was saying anyway.
Well, that's what I frankly found annoying, because I think for a lot of those artists, it would have been helpful to have his guidance. For instance, the thing I always notice, the violence in movies and on television, the reckless killing. You're teaching generations of children and young people, get what you want by killing people. And justice really comes through killing somebody. I mean, that's in almost every movie. There could have been something about that, about the need for redemption, possibility, movie and citing great movies, none of that was really touched. So I thought it was kind of, like you said, a missed opportunity. And maybe it's just that he's on the carousel of the Jubilee events that he can't get off, and that Pope Francis programmed, and maybe these speeches have been written for months or years, and he's just kind of working through the deck, praying that January will come quickly so he can move on and do what he needs to do. We'll see. Following last week's show on the rise of young people returning to the church, which if you haven't watched, you should, the New York Post is reporting that in New York City, Father, they're seeing a spike in the number of converts becoming Catholic or wanting to become Catholic. The Post found that multiple New York City Catholic churches have seen double or even triple the number of adults signing up for convert classes in the past year or so. This trend seems to be following an overall increase nationwide, and the New York Times reports this week a similar surge in Orthodox Christianity. Father, you're a priest in the Archdiocese. What do you make of these trends? Are you hearing or seeing this from your brother priests?
Well, I'm certainly seeing this in the parishes run by the Dominican fathers, because those are heavily featured in this article. The Dominican priests, the Order of Preachers, St. Dominic founded the group. They're outstanding for their scholarship, their apostolic zeal, their preaching. They're very well educated, and they're available. So they run the St. Joseph's Church in Greenwich Village, which handles NYU. You're very familiar with that parish, I know.
Indeed.
They do St. Vincent Ferrer, where their provincial headquarters are on the east side of Manhattan. No, they're wonderful priests, but their availability is not the whole answer. The other is, so many people come to New York to work from all over the country, and they're all different religions. And when you come to New York and you encounter a priest such as the Dominicans, and there are many others, diocesan priests included, at least we have a system to help them. And that's what I'm really happy about, because the Dominicans have produced so many vocations. There are plenty of priests to go around in their apostolate. So, all I can say is the Holy Spirit never stops. Mother Angelica was big on that. The Holy Spirit is working. We just got to find out what he's doing.
Well, Father and Bob, even Old St. Patrick's Down, which is, also is near NYU, they are seeing hundreds of converts, kids wanting to convert to the church. Now, the assassination of Charlie Kirk certainly is a catalyst for this. You hear that anecdotally. But what do you think is driving these young people into the arms of Catholicism and Orthodoxy?
It's a different world than the world that they're living in. And they know that the world that they're living in is not a good world. I mean, you hear this from kids that are in their 20s and 30s, that they can't get married because they can't find people that they want to spend their lives with. They don't seem to know what to do with their lives. I mean, most people are going to just get, if they're going to have fulfilling lives, they're going to have a good marriage or a decent marriage, and they're going to have a decent job that enables them to take care of their family and to contribute to society. Those are the two basic things that happen. And then they want a faith life. They want to know that this life isn't the end when you die. And look, this is a sensitive issue, but let me just try to parse this out. We see these huge numbers of people coming into these relatively Orthodox. I'm a third order Dominican, so I'm partisan to the Dominicans in New York, and I think they've got beautiful churches and great activity. But they're going to those places. And there are people like Charlie Kirk who were kept away from the Catholic Church because they thought that the church was confused under Pope Francis, let's speak frankly about this, as to a number of things that he thought were important. So there's a balance here. Of course, you have to go after all the lost sheep and the trans people and everything else. But the church really should be putting its energy, it needs numbers, it needs the kind of energetic and productive and creative people that seem to come to places like the Dominicans have. The church really needs to put a lot of effort into drawing them as well. Not just the outliers, but how about the mainstream of what people in society are going to be? The people who are going to be that middle class. I mean, we've all lived through this. The people who just love the church to bits, and they center their whole life around it, and everything else comes together because the church seems to work for them. If we want to talk about synodality, I think that's a part of synodality that's been tremendously neglected. We're talking about the peripheries all the time, but what about Main Street? What about the main road of the church?
Right.
That has to be attended to as well.
Yeah, no, your core audience. There's in the Catholic Church, and it's something I've seen. You see it in magazines, you see it in broadcast outlets and podcasts. There's almost a revulsion of the natural audience for what you do. And the programming, whether it be church services or people that are booked or shows, they actually are created to repel the audience and attract some imaginary one. So the people that would normally fill your pews in a Catholic church, why wouldn't you seek those people out and throw a welcome mat out to them? Why are you going to people who frankly will never come around to you? They're waiting for you to come around to them. And the church simply can't. And I think somehow the church has lost its way. And the orthodoxy thing that I read in that piece, I think my personal opinion of that is people come into the Catholic Church, they read about the church. A lot of these young people are readers who have found their way in through the internet or through podcasts. They educate themselves, and then the church they find is not the church they've read about. So they're looking for that church. Father, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. And, it's if you go to a parish and Father Friendly is there and, has sister reading a homily at Mass or doing some other strange liturgical aberration, what's not to like about going to a Greek Orthodox divine liturgy where the priest pays little or no attention to what you're doing because he's focused on celebrating this divine liturgy. And there's no innovations of that sort. Let me just throw, what Bob said is magnificent. Your points are right on target. The Catholic Church is not a human institution in the first place. And we forget that all the time.
Yeah.
It is the mystical body of Christ. Our duty is to convey what Jesus gave the apostles and the disciples in a new and vibrant way, answering new questions. How do we do that? St. John the Baptist said it well. I must disappear, he must increase. So through the liturgy, through the doctrine, through the discipline, all of that, that's how you tell people, hey, we're just here as servants. Focus on Jesus, the Holy Spirit will guide you. And where that's done, as in these Dominican parishes, having a great effect.
Yeah. Well, look, Thanksgiving is almost upon us here in the United States. I want to give Thanksgiving for you all, for the clarity of your voices, and to the audience that joins us every week. Thank you all. We will be off next week for Thanksgiving. Father has to celebrate Masses, and Bob has a concerto to write. And but I want to thank the posse for being here. The Arroyo Grande Prayerful Posse is always available to you. Subscribe at Arroyo Grande Show on YouTube or Arroyo Grande Podcast, wherever you get yours. On behalf of Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, until the posse rides again, stay the course, follow the light. I'm Raymond Arroyo. See you next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeart Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts.